At least every little boy dreams about putting on a cape and soaring through the air. But what if that dream came true? For the wrong boy. See, Eric was like every other kid growing up, until a tragic accident occurred, which changed his life forever. Later discovering power as a confused and broken man, Eric takes to the skies not as a hero, but as a villain that exacts his revenge on everyone who ever disappointed him. It's a story I've become quite fond of that made my stomach churn at least a couple times while reading, solely because Eric is such a fucked up guy that the dude drops a grizzly bear from the sky on some poor old detectives at one point, and then just flies off to flex in the mirror. All the while, someone has to make sense of the killings and stop Eric before he goes too far. Now, if you choose to stay, I can tell you Eric's crazed story that could very well get this video restricted and probably flagged. It happened in my Outlast video a few months ago after all, so anything's possible. Or you could just read it for yourself. Initially opening when Eric was a little boy playing with his older brother named Nicky, Eric as the villain named Red Bolt and Nicky the Streak. Eric loved playing superheroes, especially with his cape due to it being made from his childhood blanket with one of his father's patches sewn on the side. This'll be important later. Trust me. Sadly, this day would mark the beginning of an awful and bitter life for Eric, because while playing pretend, one of the branches he'd been standing on would break off, leading Eric to fall. Only he wouldn't at first. In fact, Eric began to float in the air for just a moment before removing his cape from around his neck to plummet down to the ground, causing the branch to pierce through Eric's shoulder and the fall breaking in the side of his skull, which left him with nothing short of endless agony and mental issues for life. Eric would go on the rest of his life being quite antisocial and all around just a difficult person to be around, until meeting a girl named Angie that happened to have more in common with him as a partner than his brother Nicky, naturally brightening his life and changing his trajectory of rotting on a couch to building a future that Eric wasn't interested in having, leading him to constantly fail Angie as a partner, kinda always blaming every single problem or deadline he couldn't meet on his accident, which after a while of Angie being the one wearing the pants in the relationship and being the one to always bail Eric out of a jam, it got pretty sickening to put up with. To the point of just slight confrontation, Eric would flip out and get physical with his surroundings, frightening Angie. Therefore, the relationship soon crumbled as Eric went back to live in his mother's basement to flube and waste away, until reaching for something warm to use for bed. Eric would unknowingly reclaim his childhood cape. Waking up to find himself floating a few feet in the air, Eric becomes ecstatic that he's reunited with his long-lost cape, only to remark that his mom is such a cheap bitch. Eric should have realized she'd never throw anything away. Now, I read this not knowing what it was about, and already from reading his inner monologue, I just knew I wasn't gonna like whatever Eric was gonna do next. And you probably won't either. Eric's soaring through the skies. Eric flips off the tree he fell off of, and really just takes in the power he felt was stolen from him. While switching over to Angie, she's on the phone with Nicky expressing how worried she is about Eric, figuring that he needs to help his brother, to which they set up a day to meet and figure out in person how to best help Eric, only for Eric to knock on the window to chat for a minute. Entering her home, Eric asks Angie to trust him, as Angie climbs on Eric to soar through the air together. While soaring through the sky, Angie can't believe they're flying, but Eric doesn't care about how happy she is. Probably never has to begin with. All Eric cares about is who Angie was on the phone with. Angie says a friend, but Eric remains unconvinced. Even when Angie tells Eric how much she's missed him, Eric still isn't over getting dumped. So he drops one arm holding her to say that he bets she can't imagine what it's like to be dropped, especially by someone you love, but she will now, as he completely lets go of her to watch her plummet hundreds of feet, slamming into a public park water fountain, body completely broken. All the while, Eric thinks about living his one true destiny, to finally be the bad guy for real. It only gets worse from here, folks. Much worse. The following day at Boston Medical, Nicky and a coworker of his discuss what happened to Angie, but it doesn't make a lick of sense, as Nicky's coworker describes the injuries of Angie's body to be that of a jumper that jumped from a fall of about 24 stories. But that can't be right, because there wasn't anything she could have possibly jumped that high from. Cutting back to Eric sitting on the toilet admiring his most treasured photos, a genuine psychopath, ladies and gentlemen. This could be anyone you know in real life, for that matter. Be careful out there. But unfortunately for Eric, his doom scrolling on the toilet turns bad without any toilet paper to wipe his poopy custard-ridden ass, until his poor mom delivers him a new role with the news that 2 detectives are at the door to see him. They show up to question if Eric would know anything about what happened to Angie, and during the questioning they take hair samples to see if it matches the hair found on Angie, after which the detectives go to their car and just off-rip figure he's their guy, but they can't quite prove it yet, to which Eric treats his mom like shit before putting on his cape to take care of the detectives. problems, and it's while thinking of a way to sort it out. Eric sees the zoo, and like any normal person that lives in Massachusetts, he ties a rope around a bear and flies it above the detective's car and drops it on them. Now before you ask, yeah, the cape does give him enhanced strength. It'll get explained in due time. Upon the bear mauling the detectives to death, Nikki calls Eric about Angie, thinking Eric is grieving, but Eric just mocks her death over the phone, saying she probably looks a little worse than the last time he saw her, and that she probably deserved it for seeing Nikki behind his back before hanging up and arriving back home to his mom, witnessing him flying in the backyard. Real stand-up guy for sure. Probably yelled at his mom directly after this for just existing. After which Eric looks over Angie's grave and reflects on how he never amounted to anything like his brother Nikki did, but now that he's become the villain, the sky's the limit. In need of a place to cool off and just think, Eric takes a little side quest to his dad's old cabin he and Nikki would stay at for the weekends, to find it a bit different than the last time he laid eyes on the joint. Entering the cabin to find several strangers larping and a bit defensive at the sight of Eric, until a dude named Josh recognizes Eric from grade school and cools away the tension within the cabin, introducing his gang of larpers: Bev, a witch; Omar, the shining knight; Yuki, the tiny package of fury; and finally Rob, the round. Initially, Eric wants to leave because he feels as though he's intruding, but Josh dispels that notion and invites Eric to play with them. A grave mistake on Josh's part, in which they all help Eric create his own character, the almighty Dark Wizard. Upon everyone turning in for the night, Eric opens up a swiftly put together gift from Josh containing comics and an apology letter for bullying Eric in school. It's very heartfelt, and you can genuinely tell Josh wants to put the shaky past behind them, but we already know where this is heading, don't we? Once the next day rolls around, the gang begin their adventure against Bev, the evil witch, inside her murder cave. At first, they're all having fun playing pretend, but in the heat of the moment, Eric throws a real punch at Bev, and this sours everything. Everyone doesn't mess with Eric anymore, despite Josh and Rob's attempts to make amends and adventure more, to which Eric steps out to soar the skies and think for a bit. Only every thought he has is evil and twisted, convincing himself that the only way to make this better is to kill everyone. Grabbing a hold of Bev and Omar's tent while sleeping and whipping them against several trees like Filthy Frank with a sock full of rats. The next day rolls over and everyone wonders where Bev and Omar have gone since they were their rides back home, but Eric convinces them that they both had a big fight about cheating and drove off. Everyone is naturally a bit suspicious of Eric, but they choose to carry on with LARPing by making Eric play the role he was born for, the villain. Eric goes ahead to prepare his act while everyone goes together to fight the Dark Wizard. Only while on the trail, it's there they find Omar and Bev hung up above their truck. Bev falls through the tent onto the car and achingly begs for help, while Yuki, Rob, and Josh start freaking out. Eric, up above in the sky watching them, yells at them because they weren't supposed to find Bev and Omar, but now that they have, they'll now have to run for their lives. Eric chooses Rob to be the first to go, despite how nice he was to Eric from the very start, lifting Rob up into the air and dropping him above a pole, piercing straight through and out of his mouth, left as a message to Josh and Yuki of the collective fates they'll soon meet. And I just have to say, this was just utterly gut-wrenching to read, because these guys never had to die. Eric never had to do any of this. Only that's how awful Eric is. He likes that he can do this, that he can make these people beg and plead, give them hope, just to take it all away. It's awful. And it gets even worse when he just makes fun of them for wanting to live, only to murder both Yuki and Josh in the most monstrous ways imaginable, all because he could. It's after all the death and misery, Eric wonders if his long-dead dad would be proud of the man he's become, and he doesn't think so. But it doesn't stop him from enjoying the horrors he's made any less. So why stop there? Why not kill his own mom for keeping this power from him for so long, attempting to spear a flagstick through her, or trying to make her crash to her own death, until he has an even greater idea: holding his own mom hostage over Nikki, so they can be Streak and the Red Bolt again, and the Red Bolt could finally win. After all, Eric has never been good at anything save for being the villain, and it's once he gets what he wants and burns the side of Nikki's face, Eric's mom grabs a nearby lamp, striking it over Eric's face, knocking him out. It's here Eric blacks out and enters a dream where he's a kid across from Angie, this time all mangled, and mocking Eric for failing yet again, motivating Eric to wake up and lock in at being an even more fucked up human being by dropping a cinder block on a random cop just existing, while simultaneously tracking down what flight his mom got on to escape Eric and just lops a fucking chainsaw in one of the plane's engines, leading it to crash into what I believe to be the Zachem Bridge. R.I.P. the Zachem Bridge. You were the GOAT. This all happens to occur while Nikki is still recovering in Boston Medical, and Nikki is unable to control himself upon hearing the news that the flight his mom took crashed, leaving no survivors, making Nikki feel especially guilty because he was the one who made his mom go on the flight thinking it was the best idea at the time. Naturally, freaking out over this, Eric floats outside taking great delight in the torment he's inflicted upon his brother. But it's not enough. The Streak and the Red Bolt need to have their final showdown once and for all. So Eric writes on Nikki's hospital room window with some lip balm to meet at the very top of the Prudential building alone. Otherwise, more people are going to die. Feeling no other choice but to do what Eric says, Nikki takes off his bandages to see his face all messed up, puts on a disguise to get out of the hospital unnoticed, and makes his way to the top of the Prudential building not to fight, but to convince Eric into getting himself the help he desperately needs, and that he won't let Eric go to jail despite how much he deserves to. Only Eric won't allow it. He lost the cape before. He won't let it happen again. So he begins beating on Nikki, while Nikki tries again and again to convince Eric of how insane he's become by killing their mom, Angie, and anyone else in his way. There is no way Eric can properly justify his actions in any sane way. Eric's mind is just vile through and through. It's only after Eric has beaten Nikki to an absolute pulp that Eric flies up into the sky and remarks how it's a similar night to the one when he dropped Angie into the fountain, letting Nikki go to the same cruel fate. Yet Nikki grabs a hold of Eric's cape just before falling, begging and pleading for Eric to stop. But Eric can't stop. He doesn't want to. So Nikki reaches for a pair of scissors he taped against his ankle, and since he gave Eric every chance to do the right thing, Nikki cuts the cape from around Eric's neck, and Nikki watches as Eric falls to his own death, pleading for Nikki to save him, only to come crashing down on the pavement. Eric is no more. Everything turns black. Rot in hell, Eric. Days go by, and Nikki reflects on his happiest moments with his brother, only to remind himself of the monster he became by looking upon the cape. And although the cape and its power can be tempting, Nikki takes the cape and burns it, bringing an end to the story. While there is another story involving the cape that has to do with their father acquiring the powers in the first place after a naked magic man kisses him, but you should honestly read the story for yourself if you're interested. And I did leave out a lot of key moments within this story, so to not ruin it for you if you decide to go and read it for yourself. Overall, I really like this comic not only for its shockingly graphic displays of murder, but I also just wanted to see this guy bite it from the very first issue. Eric is the worst kind of person, if you can even call him that. He's a guy that takes pleasure in others' pain and suffering, which at times made me sick to read because for the sake of my mind, I don't like to read this kind of horrific shit anymore. It just messes with my mental. Even now, the idea of reading something like Adventure Time to bleach my mind of this comic sounds glorious. I think a criticism I have is that the story feels at times very fast at some points, but that might be due to how the story has very little dialogue in certain issues, feeling more like a manga where the story is in the panel. That said, I think writer Jason Ciaramella and Zach Howard did a phenomenal job on the series, especially with colors done by Nelson Daniel along with the lettering done by Sean Lee. I also feel like I should say that I in no way advocate for Eric's character in this story. Do not look at this dude as some inspiration to finally be a fucked up person, or in another case, finding a way to continue to be a horrible person. If this shit is inspiring to you, seek help. Although if it inspires creatively, I guess that's fine. I'm also aware that this is a somewhat short video, but I'm just working on something that's taking a bit of time, so expect stuff like this for the time being. In the meantime, you can support me on Patreon, follow my socials, and leave a like along with a subscribe. I hope y'all liked the video. I'll catch y'all on the flip side.